Rain hammered against the airport terminal's glass, each drop like a frantic heartbeat. Amid the polished floors and echoing announcements, a small German shepherd sat rigid, eyes locked on a lone suitcase that trembled slightly as if alive. The girl kneeling beside him, her knuckles white against the cold handle of the leash, whispered apologies he couldn't understand. People bustled past, oblivious, their heels clacking and voices blurring into a dull roar. But the dog's gaze never wavered. A low growl rumbled from his chest, almost human in its insistence, as if warning the world of a danger only he could sense. She felt her stomach twist, her own fear bubbling up, yet she trusted him, this trembling bundle of fur who had become her anchor in a place where everything was suddenly foreign and hostile. Something was in that suitcase. Something the world wasn't ready to see. And for the first time, she realized her dog might be the only one standing between chaos and catastrophe. The airport was a river of motion, a ceaseless flow of hurried feet, rolling suitcases, and the faint hum of conversations layered over distant announcements. Rain streaked the terminal's glass walls, smudging the city outside into gray abstraction. Inside, polished floors reflected the scattered light, but the girl barely noticed. Her focus was anchored on a small, trembling German shepherd at her side. He sat rigid, ears flicking at every footstep, nose twitching like he could taste the tension in the air. Something about the way he stared at the lone suitcase on the distant conveyor belt made her stomach tighten, an unexplainable dread settling over her chest like cold stone. The leash in her hand was taut, a lifeline in her grasp, and she found herself whispering to him, soft syllables that sounded foolish to anyone who might overhear. "It's okay. It's just a suitcase. Just wait." Her voice barely rose above the murmur of the crowd. Yet in the dog's gaze she saw something fierce, urgent, that made her own breath hitch. People passed by without noticing, their ears deafened by headphones, their eyes glued to screens, their minds elsewhere. But the dog's low, almost imperceptible growl wove a thread of tension that she couldn't ignore. She tried to rationalize. Airports were crowded, security tight. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps it was just him being skittish as he sometimes was around loud spaces. Yet the way he shifted, the muscles coiling under his fur, the way his nails scraped against the smooth floor, it was instinct, not fear. She knew the difference. She'd read it in his eyes before, in the quiet moments when the world outside didn't make sense, but he could see clearly, could see the danger lurking in the shadows of her daily life. And now, as the suitcase wobbled slightly, as if aware of their gaze, her rational mind faltered. Something was there, something the world wasn't ready for. The rain outside intensified, thrumming against the terminal's roof like a drumbeat, a pulse in sync with the tension coiling in her chest. She shifted her weight, trying to calm the dog, but he refused to relax, stepping closer to the suitcase, his growl rising into a protective snarl. Other travelers glanced at him briefly, some offering forced smiles, others rolling their eyes, muttering about a nervous Petsa or overprotective owner's. None of them understood that this was no ordinary reaction. She felt the weight of it pressing on her shoulders, a gravity she couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. Her thoughts raced. Memories of his puppyhood surfaced, the nights when he trembled in the storm, the tiny whimpers he made as if warning her of shadows in the dark, the times he had nudged her hand with precision when danger or distress was near. She remembered the day he had alerted her to the smoke leaking from a neighbor's kitchen, saving them from disaster. The way his instincts had always been uncanny, unnerving even. And now he was speaking again, not in words but in growls, intense shifts of weight in those wide, knowing eyes. Something was coming, something she couldn't yet see. She knelt beside him, fingers curling into his damp fur, drawing in the faint scent of rain and his earthy warmth. Okay, she whispered again, though her voice quavered with an anxiety that felt like it had lodged in her throat. He leaned into her touch but didn't break his focus, and that made her heart both soar and sink. She was tethered to his alertness, as if his perception had become a lifeline for both of them. Around them, the terminal blurred. The rolling suitcases, the flashing screens, the calls announcing departures, they all seemed to fade into a background noise that had no meaning in this moment. Only him, only the suitcase, only the unspoken tension. Footsteps approached. A man in a security uniform glanced at the dog, raising an eyebrow. "Is he agitated?" he asked, a hint of impatience in his tone. The girl shook her head quickly, her hand tightening on the leash. I don't know. Something's wrong. Please, just check it." The man hesitated, scanning the suitcase, then the dog, who had lowered his body slightly, ready to spring, his ears pinned back, tail stiff. There was an unspoken urgency in that stance, a warning that made her stomach churn. She could feel the hair on her arm standing up, the fine tremor of adrenaline threading through her fingers. No one else noticed yet. The crowd flowed around them, oblivious to the silent alarm that hummed in the air. The dog barked once, sharp and commanding, enough to make a few heads turn. A ripple of curiosity passed through the nearby travelers, but no one understood the gravity. The girl could almost hear her own heartbeat over the terminal's hum, thudding like a drum marking time against an unseen danger. Every instinct in her screamed that they were at the edge of something that could not be unseen. She glanced at the suitcase again. It sat there, unremarkable to anyone else, just a plain black bag, handle up, tag fluttering in the artificial breeze of the air vents. But the dog treated it like a predator, a silent threat lurking in plain sight. And in that moment she understood. Trust him and do what you must. The years of shared experiences, the quiet language they had built together in small gestures and nightly walks, had led to this moment. His warning was not a quirk. It was a lifeline. The crowd was oblivious, moving like a tide around them, but they were in a bubble of tension, a small island suspended in time. She could feel the weight of the world, the fragile thread that separated routine from catastrophe. And as the dog's low growl deepened, vibrating through her hands and into her chest, she realized something that made her blood run cold. This was real. This was danger, quiet and unseen to everyone else, but sharp, alive, and undeniable to the two of them. She tightened her grip on the leash, murmured his name softly, and whispered a vow she barely understood herself. "We'll face it together. Whatever it is, we'll face it." His ears flicked back, a subtle acknowledgement, a promise that they were ready. The moment stretched, taut as the string of a bow, and the world held its breath with them. Somewhere beneath the polished floors and fluorescent lights, fate waited, and they were the first to know it. The girl felt her knees press against the cold tiles, the chill creeping through her jacket, but she ignored it. All that mattered was the dog beside her, the suitcase ahead, and the storm both outside and inside that was about to break. And then, just for a heartbeat, she imagined what might be inside the suitcase. The dog's growl had deepened, rolling from his chest like distant thunder, and the girl felt it reverberate through her own body. She knelt closer, pressing her palm against his damp fur, feeling the tension in every muscle, the barely restrained energy that suggested he could move at any second. Around them, the airport moved on as if nothing were amiss. Feet shuffled, luggage wheels clacked, and announcements droned over speakers, but the bubble of intensity around the girl and her dog made all else seem distant, like a world behind glass. She could almost feel the hum of their instincts against the sterile hum of fluorescent lights, a clash between instinct and indifference. She tried to reason with herself, to quiet the gnawing fear clawing at her chest. Perhaps it was the noise, the unfamiliarity of the crowded terminal, the sharp smells of rain-soaked coats and antiseptic cleaning fluids playing tricks on both of them. Yet no rational explanation could override the raw, undeniable alert in his eyes. Every time she looked at the suitcase, it seemed to vibrate with invisible energy, a presence that was subtle but undeniable. The dog shifted, his gaze locked, teeth barely visible as he snarled a warning at the unassuming object. Her fingers trembled around the leash. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself, but adrenaline pulsed in her veins, sharp and unforgiving. This was no ordinary moment of anxiety. It was a visceral alarm, a premonition she couldn't name but could feel in her marrow. Memories of past small rescues flashed unbidden, scrapes and tumbles in the neighborhood, the time he had barked at the neighbor's leaking gas line, each an echo of the bond that had grown between them over years of shared instincts. His alertness was never wrong, and now it screamed that something critical lay ahead. People had begun to notice. The mother tugged her child back, muttering something about a strange dog, while a man on the phone stopped mid-sentence to glance curiously. Their gazes barely met the suitcase. They focused on the dog's behavior instead, misunderstanding the real threat. The girl could feel frustration bubbling up, not at them, but at the universe's insistence on indifference. She wanted to shout, to force people to see what her dog had already known. Instead, she kept her voice low, murmuring reassurances to him, tracing the line of his spine with her fingers. "Stay calm, stay close. Each word felt tiny, insufficient yet necessary. The dog's posture stiffened further, tail rigid, eyes narrowing to narrow slits of focus. She could see the subtle shifts, the flexing of paws, the flick of his ears, the slight bristle of his fur along the ridge of his back. He was mapping the space around the suitcase, sensing the invisible weight of danger that she could not yet perceive. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her own body, but every instinct in her screamed that this was urgent. This wasn't just a protective reaction. It was a clear signal of impending harm, something unseen, lurking in plain sight. She called security again, voice firmer this time, though it still felt drowned in the terminal's constant murmur. "Oh, please. You need to check that suitcase," she insisted, tugging lightly at the leash to keep the dog's attention. The officer approached cautiously, clipboard in hand, scanning her, the dog, and finally the suitcase. His eyes flickered between them, uncertain, caught between routine procedure and the subtle tension in the air. "It's probably nothing," he said, though the faint furrow of his brow betrayed a flicker of doubt. The dog's growl deepened, a low, warning rumble that made her spine shiver. She remembered a winter evening when the dog had refused to enter a dark alley, barking insistently until she turned around. At the time she had laughed, thinking he was merely cautious. Later she had learned of a fallen power line, the alley dangerous, invisible to anyone who wasn't attuned to subtle signals. That memory pressed against her now with weighty clarity. He had saved her once, unknowingly, instinctively. Could this moment be the same, only larger, more consequential? The thought made her stomach churn, a mixture of fear and awe threading through her chest. The suitcase sat innocuously on the conveyor belt, ordinary to the untrained eye. Black, nondescript, a tag fluttering in the recycled air of the terminal. Oh. But her dog treated it as a predator, circling, tail stiff, growl deep and resonant. He sniffed the air around it, nudged it with a paw, barked, then backed away as if measuring the threat. Her hands tightened on the leash, nails biting into her palm, heart hammering. She followed his movements, instinct and fear intertwining, realizing that every subtle cue, the tilt of his head, the angle of his shoulders, the growl rumbling in his throat, was a language of its own. She had to interpret it perfectly to survive this moment. An elderly couple approached, curious, their eyes on the dog's behavior. "Is it dangerous?" the woman asked, her voice tremulous. The girl shook her head, unable to explain. "I don't know how to explain it," she murmured. He knows. I just trust him." The man frowned, unconvinced, but before they could question further, the dog barked sharply, snapping their attention to the suitcase. For a moment, the weight of the terminal's indifference lifted, replaced by a pulse of awareness, a shared tension that had been invisible until that second. The girl took a step forward, pulling the dog slightly closer, forcing herself to breathe steadily despite the adrenaline biting at her chest. Rain continued to drum against the glass, a constant reminder of the outside world that seemed oblivious to the storm inside. She focused entirely on him, the quiver of his muscles, the intensity in his amber eyes, the way he moved as if anticipating the suitcase's next gesture. She had learned over years of shared trust that he was never wrong. His instincts had always been precise, uncanny, terrifyingly accurate. And now they were screaming that something urgent was about to happen. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Each second felt both fleeting and eternal. The conveyor belt hummed, passengers shuffled, announcements droned, but all of it became background noise. Her heartbeats synchronized with his growl, a rhythm of danger, a silent countdown. The suitcase had become a focal point, a pivot on which reality tilted. And she could feel the pull, a subtle vibration on the floor, a sense of pressure in the air. Her mind raced with possibilities, none comforting, all terrifying. She swallowed hard, murmuring again, "Stay close. We'll get through this." And then, without warning, the dog barked again, louder, sharper, a warning that could no longer be ignored. People turned, startled, their attention shifting briefly, the tension in the air palpable, electric. She pressed closer to him, hand on his back, breathing shallow, feeling the full force of what instinct had revealed. Something was in that suitcase, something unseen, something that the world had not yet realized was dangerous. And she, tethered to the dog, felt both the weight of responsibility and the surge of courage that would be required to face it. The terminal had shifted, no longer just a blur of passing feet and rolling luggage. It now seemed alive with an undercurrent of danger that only the girl and her dog could perceive. The suitcase sat quietly, innocuous in appearance, but it radiated a subtle menace, a weight she could feel pressing through the soles of her shoes into her bones. Her fingers tightened on the leash, tracing the taut muscles of her companion, who had lowered himself slightly, every sinew coiled like a spring, eyes never leaving the object. The hum of the terminal seemed distant, replaced by the drumbeat of her own heart, syncing with his growls that rumbled low, insistent, almost human in their urgency. She crouched closer, smelling the faint tang of ozone that clung to the air, a scent she couldn't place but that made the hairs on her neck rise. Security personnel had finally arrived, eyes flicking nervously between her and the suitcase, their movements hesitant, unsure. She wanted to scream, to shove the urgency of this moment into their awareness, but her voice caught in her throat. All she could do was plead with gestures small enough to seem inconsequential yet charged with silent alarm. Please. Listen, she mouthed, words dissolving into desperation. The dog barked sharply, snapping their attention, growling as he stepped closer to the suitcase, circling it with precision. It wasn't just fear, it was assessment, a calculated reaction to a threat invisible to human eyes. She could feel the hairs on her arms stand on end, the adrenaline coiling tightly inside her chest, the same feeling she'd had the night he had refused to enter the alley near their home. Only now, the stakes were immeasurably higher. She knelt lower, pressing her palm into his wet fur, murmuring encouragement even as terror and awe battled within her. The crowd had begun to notice, though most still didn't grasp the gravity. Phones appeared, cameras flicked, whispers rippled. Some people laughed nervously, misreading the dog's behavior as hyperactivity, while others edged away uneasy. She ignored them, focusing on the subtle dance between him and the suitcase. Every slight movement of the dog, his paw hovering just above the floor, a flick of his ears, the curl of his lips, spoke volumes to her, conveying urgency, danger, and an almost prophetic awareness of what was to come. Security officers exchanged glances, the weight of protocol battling with instinct. One step closer, scanner in hand, while the other attempted to direct curious bystanders away. She watched, heart hammering, as the first officer slowly circled the suitcase, scanner humming faintly. Her dog's growl rose to a crescendo, low and menacing, ears flattened, eyes fixed. It was as if he could sense the suitcase's secrets, its invisible threat, and he would not allow anyone to approach without warning. The girl leaned closer, pressing her forehead to his side, feeling the rapid thrum of his heartbeat beneath her palm. They were aligned, tethered by instinct and trust, ready for whatever lay hidden within. Her mind raced, spinning through possibilities. What could be inside this unassuming bag to trigger such a reaction? Weapons, explosives, chemicals. The scenarios multiplied with terrifying clarity, each more horrifying than the last. She felt the familiar ache of helplessness, the same ache she had felt in previous moments when danger had presented itself too suddenly, too invisibly. Yet she also felt an odd surge of courage, born not from confidence but from the fierce, unwavering presence of her companion. He had chosen to trust her with this moment, and she could not falter. The scanner hummed, hovering just above the suitcase, yet it seemed unable to detect the threat her dog had already located. She watched his eyes narrow, gaze unwavering, ears swiveling like radar. The hum of the terminal had faded entirely. All she could hear was his growl, her own shallow breaths, and the faint thrum of energy radiating from the suitcase, a vibration she couldn't explain but felt in the marrow of her bones. Her fingers tightened on the leash, nails digging into her palms, grounding herself in the tangible while her mind raced through the unseen. A small crowd had gathered now, drawn by the tension, murmuring in speculation and curiosity. Some speculated a prank, some whispered about a bomb threat, their voices small against the growl and the pounding of her heart. She pressed herself closer to the dog, brushing the hair from his eyes and murmuring reassurances, though her own voice shook. "We can do this," she whispered. "We'll get through this." He leaned into her, not as a pet, but as a guardian, a sentinel whose instincts had guided them both to this point. The air seemed to thicken around the suitcase, charged with a palpable menace. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and a cold draft swept across the terminal, brushing against the girl's jacket, making her shiver. She noticed the faint metallic tang in the air, subtle but real, and her stomach knotted tighter. Every instinct in her screamed. Every memory of past rescues pulsed through her, converging on this singular moment. The dog circled again, low growl vibrating through the floor and into her knees, ears pricked, nose twitching as he mapped the invisible threat. Security moved cautiously, one officer gesturing for the girl to step back, the other preparing equipment, their movements tentative, uncertain. She shook her head, murmuring, "No, stay, wait." The dog barked again, sharp, commanding attention, signaling that retreat was not an option. Her heart pounded, a drumbeat of fear and anticipation. She could feel every second stretching, taut with tension, every breath a reminder of the fragility of the moment. Her dog had become her anchor, her guide, the interpreter of a threat no human could yet comprehend. She thought of her life with him, the quiet evenings, the small triumphs, the way he had always sensed what she could not. And now in this immense, sterile space filled with oblivious humanity, he had chosen to trust her with the awareness of danger. A surge of emotion tightened in her throat. Fear, yes, but also awe, gratitude, and a fierce protectiveness. She pressed closer to him, murmuring, "We'll see it through together." He leaned into her again, a small, comforting nuzzle that belied the storm of instincts coiling around them both. Time slowed, stretched, contracted, folding in on itself. Every footstep in the terminal, every whispered comment, every squeak of a suitcase wheel became background noise. Only he, only the suitcase, only the silent threat of impending catastrophe remained. And as her breath fogged in the cool, recycled air of the terminal, she realized that the invisible danger had already begun to shape their world, pulling at the edges of routine and safety. The dog had seen it first, and now it was up to her to trust him, to trust herself, and to face the hidden threat before it could manifest fully. The terminal erupted into sudden, sharp awareness as security personnel finally converged around the suitcase. The girl felt the surge of adrenaline like a physical force pressing against her chest, mingling with fear, relief, and a raw, jagged edge of anticipation. Her dog's growl had transformed into a commanding bark, low and precise, a warning that cut through the noise of the crowd. Fluorescent lights flickered faintly overhead, throwing stark reflections on the polished floor, shadows stretching and folding like living shapes. Every eye in the immediate area darted between the girl, her dog, and the suitcase, but none could perceive the invisible tension that vibrated in the air. The officers moved with measured caution, scanning devices in hand, careful not to provoke whatever lay within the unassuming black bag. Her dog stepped forward, body taut, ears pinned, nose brushing the cold floor, muscles coiled with instinctive knowledge. She knelt beside him, hand resting lightly on his back, feeling the vibrations of his growl ripple into her own chest. "It's okay, we're almost there," she murmured, though her words felt fragile against the storm of potential disaster. He looked at her briefly, eyes wide, and she saw in them the same mix of courage and urgency she felt herself. People in the terminal began murmuring, some edging back, some frozen in place, phones held high to capture the tension, but the girl tuned out all noise except the low hum of her dog's warning and the harsh metallic scent that had grown stronger, tinged with something chemical, almost electric. She pressed closer, fingers entwined in his fur, grounding herself in the living presence beside her. Years of shared instincts had prepared her for this. She trusted him implicitly, more than any human, more than any protocol, because he had never been wrong. Not once. And now his confidence became her own. The suitcase trembled subtly, though no one else seemed to notice. She could see it in the micro-shifts of its balance, the almost imperceptible pressure in the fabric, as if whatever lay inside was aware, reactive. Her pulse raced, adrenaline sharpening every sense. The hum of ventilation, the soft clatter of rolling suitcases in the distance, even the muted footsteps of onlookers, all became part of a heightened symphony of awareness, feeding her perception. Her dog barked again, a sharp commending note, and she realized that he was guiding not only her but everyone nearby toward safety. One officer finally nodded to his colleague. The scanner lifted carefully over the suitcase. The girl felt her stomach tighten as every second stretched unbearably. She pressed closer to her dog, hand on his neck, feeling the rapid rise and fall of his breathing matching her own. "A steady, steady," she whispered. She had faced fear before, but never like this. Never with the potential for lives hanging in the balance, never with the pressure of trust concentrated in a single living presence beside her. He was more than a companion. He was a sentinel, a guide, a shield against the unseen. Suddenly, a faint vibration ran through the terminal floor, imperceptible to most but clear to her and the dog. He stiffened, low growl vibrating in his chest, tail rigid, ears forward. The officers paused, scanning movements, freezing as if sensing the shift. She gripped his fur tighter, feeling the surge of courage and fear collide in her own body. She realized that every choice, every breath, every step mattered. The world outside, the bustling terminal, the indifferent passengers, had been suspended, all focus distilled into this moment of impending consequence. The dog lunged forward slightly, nudging the suitcase with his nose, bark erupting sharp. A jolt of clarity hit her. Whatever threat lay inside, his instinct had pinpointed it with absolute precision. She caught her own breath, hands trembling, and whispered, "We trust you. We trust you." It was a vow, a promise, an acknowledgement that she was not alone in this. Around them, chaos seemed to pulse in slow motion. People stepping back, officers exchanging tense glances, distant announcements blaring unintelligible safety instructions. But she remained tethered to the dog, to his instincts, to the silent language they shared. Her mind flickered to past rescues, past moments when the dog had guided her through danger with quiet precision. Each memory reinforced the bond, the shared trust, the reliance that had never faltered. She felt a surge of fierce determination, an understanding that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. She was not just a bystander in this storm. She was a participant, an essential part of the chain that might prevent disaster. Her fingers dug lightly into his fur, grounding herself, absorbing his calm, his certainty. The suitcase shifted again, the vibration more pronounced, the faint metallic tang in the air intensifying. The dog barked a second, longer note commanding attention. She felt the surge of adrenaline morph into clarity, a tunnel of perception opening around her. She could see the contours of danger in subtle visual cues. The slight bulge in the bag, the way it resisted the pull of gravity almost imperceptibly, the tension in the air like static. Her breath came in shallow, rapid bursts, but she did not flinch. This was the moment she had been led to, the crucible of instinct and courage, the apex of trust between human and animal. Officers began carefully moving the suitcase onto a secure platform, guided by the dog's signals, every movement deliberate and precise. The girl felt her heart hammering, the adrenaline coursing, her body alive with both fear and awe. Around them, the terminal was a blur of motion, but she remained rooted, a silent witness to the unfolding of a disaster averted by instinct, courage, and shared trust. Her dog leaned into her again, brief nuzzle against her hand, a reminder that she was not alone. He had seen the danger first, and together, they had led the world, however briefly, into awareness. And then as the suitcase was isolated and officers stepped back, the hum of tension began to ease, though the adrenaline lingered, sharp and electric. She exhaled slowly, grounding herself, feeling the dog's steadying presence beside her. The world outside the immediate circle resumed its motion, passengers whispering, looking around, trying to understand the drama they had only partially witnessed. She held on to him, pressed her forehead to his wet fur, and whispered softly, "We did it together." His eyes, calm now, met hers, and she felt the full weight of the bond that had carried them through. Rain pattered against the terminal glass, a soft, insistent reminder of the outside world, normal and indifferent. Yet inside, in that cocoon of fear, instinct, and courage, a storm had been faced and survived. The girl understood, in a sudden, profound way, that courage was not merely in action, but in trust, trust in others, trust in instinct, trust in the invisible thread that connected her to the dog who had chosen this moment to guide her. And as she rose to her feet, leash in hand, she realized the depth of that courage, the quiet heroism that had unfolded not in spectacle, but in the precise, unwavering instincts of her companion. The terminal exhaled. The tension that had vibrated through the polished floors, the humming lights, and the hurried shuffle of passengers finally began to dissipate. The suitcase, now isolated and contained, no longer pulsed with menace. Yet the girl remained kneeling beside her dog, hand pressed against his damp fur, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat, a rhythm that had carried them both through danger and doubt. Around them, passengers whispered in awe and relief. Officers exhaled quietly, and the metallic scent that had clung to the air began to fade. But for her, the world had shifted irreversibly. She had glimpsed the fragile thread between instinct, courage, and survival, and it had run straight through the living presence at her side. Her dog's ears flicked, tail wagging just slightly, the tension in his body softening like a wave retreating from a shore. She reached down, brushing the rain-damp hair from his eyes, and whispered a shaky, grateful word. "You did it." He nudged her hand with his nose, a small grounding gesture that carried more meaning than any words could convey. In that moment, she understood the depth of trust they shared, not the casual kind forged in daily companionship, but a bond tempered in the crucible of real danger, a connection that transcended language and instinct. The crowd began to resume its rhythm, hesitant yet curious, but the girl remained rooted, unwilling to leave the cocoon of quiet safety that had formed around them. Her eyes lingered on the black suitcase, now a silent reminder of what had been, and she felt a profound mix of relief, awe, and sorrow for what could have happened. The dog had sensed it first, acted before any human machinery could detect the threat, and together they had averted disaster. She pressed her forehead against his, feeling the warmth of life, loyalty, and courage. Her body relaxed in small increments, the adrenaline slowly draining, leaving behind a tremulous awareness of what had just occurred. She thought back over the past days and weeks, the mundane moments that had prepared her for this extraordinary one. The walks in the rain, the quiet evenings, the times he had refused to enter certain spaces, all seemed now like gentle training for this crescendo. Memories layered over one another. His first cautious bark at a stranger, the tremble of his body when storms had rolled through their neighborhood, the tiny victories of guidance and protection that had never been dramatic, but had been infinitely real. And now all those small threads had converged into a single, undeniable act of heroism. Security officers approached her, faces a mixture of awe and curiosity. "He really alerted you?" One asked, voice soft. She nodded, still kneeling, still holding him close. "He knew," she said simply, "but before anyone else. Before anything, I trusted him, and he trusted me back." The officer hesitated, glancing at the dog with something akin to reverence, as if acknowledging that courage and insight had walked on four legs, tethered to a single human heart. Around them, the terminal resumed its flow. Yet the girl felt a quiet separation from it now, a moment suspended in memory that would remain forever, unrepeatable and sacred. Rain continued to streak the glass outside, soft and persistent, casting the terminal in a silvery sheen. She watched the droplets run in jagged paths down the windows, reflections of light refracting like tiny shards of glass. Her dog shook off the dampness from his coat, and she laughed softly, the sound brittle but genuine. It was a release, a letting go of fear, a celebration of survival and trust. She knelt to hug him, feeling the warmth of his body against hers, the pulse of life, the beating heart that had guided them both through unseen danger. Each breath she drew carried the scent of rain, fur, and antiseptic, a mingling of the ordinary and the extraordinary. For a moment, she allowed herself to absorb the full weight of the experience, the terror, the urgency, the absolute reliance on another living being to navigate a world that often ignored danger until it was too late. Her dog rested his head against her shoulder, eyes closing briefly, and she stroked his fur, murmuring thanks for a bond that had become more than companionship. It had become salvation, a living bridge between instinct and action, between vulnerability and courage. In that quiet corner of the terminal, she realized that heroism could exist in silence, in small, unwavering gestures, in the steadfast presence of someone who refused to look away. People resumed their movement around them, some shooting curious glances, others whispering about what had happened. The girl barely noticed them. She was entirely present with the dog, feeling the echo of adrenaline still vibrating in her veins, the profound sense of gratitude that could not be adequately expressed in words. She pressed her face to his neck, inhaling the faint, earthy scent of fur mixed with the rain, and felt a sense of completion, a sense that the storm had passed but had left something enduring behind, a bond that had been forged in pressure and fear, and had survived intact, unbroken. The suitcase remained behind, now a neutral object stripped of menace by careful containment and the interventions of human authority. Yet for her it would forever be a symbol of what had been averted, a testament to the vigilance of her companion and the extraordinary clarity of instinct honed over years of shared life. She stood, leash in hand, and allowed herself to feel the quiet triumph that accompanied survival. the profound relief of knowing that she and her dog had faced danger together and had emerged unscathed. The terminal hummed around them, life returning to its ordinary pace, but she carried within her a memory that would never fade. As she walked toward the exit, dog at her side, she cast one last glance at the spot where the suitcase had rested. Rain-streaked glass reflected his eyes back at her, amber and steady, full of intelligence, courage, and unwavering loyalty. She smiled softly, a mixture of awe and tenderness threading through her chest. She knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, bound by a bond strengthened in the crucible of fear, trust, and shared vigilance. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself to simply exhale, carrying the quiet, indelible echo of heroism and love that only they could fully understand. Outside, the rain had softened into a gentle drizzle. The world felt fresh, washed, yet somehow irrevocably changed. She looked down at him, brushing a wet strand of fur from his eyes, and whispered, "We made it together." His tail wagged slowly, a subtle acknowledgement, and she felt the lingering resonance of courage and loyalty echo through her, through him, and through the moment that would forever define them. Men. In that shared glance, in that heartbeat of understanding, she knew that some bonds transcended words, transcended fear, and became something eternal, etched into memory like the soft patter of rain on glass, gentle, persistent, unforgettable.